Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to go through a very brief history of Spring and Spring Boot set of tools and technologies. If you are already a user of Spring Boot and perhaps you are a bit curious to know how this tool has evolved over the years and how we got where we are right now regarding this tool, then this video is for you. Okay, let's get started. So, the year is 1996. The first version of Java has been released, and the first version of Servlet also got released. Just have to mention that at the time, people were using something called CGI for developing web applications. So, Servlet got ideas from CGI, of course, made some improvements over it, and it looked quite a bit also like CGI if you have seen a CGI code, and it became the foundation of server-side web applications since. And actually, it didn't look all that different to a CGI application in terms of simplicity. It was quite hard to work with. Here is an example of a serverless application. As you can see, you get access to the request and response objects, but the rest is up to you. Serving the response was actually printing out the HTML code tag by tag and line by line to the client. So very, very hard to work with. But believe it or not, people were developing web applications using servlets. So there was a need for a better specification, and that happened in 1999 when J2EE specification was released. It was a set of standards for developing multi-tier enterprise applications using Java. One of the major parts of J2EE was something called Java Server Pages or JSPs, which made creating dynamic web pages much easier compared to servlets. And tell you what, J2EE also came with a bunch of beautiful architecture diagrams. This box in the middle is your J2EE application, which has two major components, a web container and an EJB container. EJB container is where the bulk of your server-side logic would live in, and they were a nightmare. Writing EJBs was about lots and lots of boilerplate code. Also, you couldn't run your EJBs in a normal web server. It needed a special container called EJB container, which was very slow. Also, unit testing those EJBs were just an absolute nightmare. So, all in all, nobody liked EJBs. To get an idea of what EJBs look like, here is an example. Even the simplest applications, even a Hello World application, would need a session bean, a home interface, and a remote interface. You had to compile them, package them, and deploy them separately. So a very slow development cycle. What everyone was thinking about was that yes, I want to develop enterprise applications, but no, I don't want to deal with EJBs. It also gave rise to a whole new series of MVC frameworks, which Struts perhaps was one of the more popular ones, but there were many more examples similar to Struts. In 2002, everything started to change when Rod Johnson wrote this book, J2EE Design and Development. Basically, this book was about writing Java enterprise applications without using EJBs. The book came with a CD that contained more than 30,000 lines of code. That code contained the foundations of dependency injection that we still use in Spring to this date. The code in that CD very quickly became popular and people started using it in their own real-world applications. 2 years later, in 2004, Rod Johnson released the first version of Spring based on the code in his own book. He called his framework Spring because he thought it was a new beginning after the harsh and long J2EE winter. At the heart of the framework were POJOs, or plain old Java objects, dependency injection, and aspect-oriented programming, or AOP. Also, the framework heavily relied on XML files. So people call this XML glory days. Every application contained massive amount of XML files. At the same time, also the first version of Spring MVC was created. Spring MVC was created as a reaction to Struts to address some of the issues that was in Struts and also create an MVC framework that fits better in the whole Spring ecosystem. Like all the other parts of Spring framework, Spring MVC also heavily relied on XML configuration files to work. For any web application, for the very least, you would have to create a web XML file and a Beans XML file. Spring 2.5 is considered as one of the major milestones because for the first time, annotations were introduced into the framework, which meant all those obscure XML files were not necessary anymore. Now, to mark a class as a controller, all you had to do was add the controller annotation at top of the class. Or if you wanted to wire your components to each other, you could do that with an auto-wired annotation. All these things you had to do using XML files before. The next major release of Spring came in 2009 when the version 3 was released. In this version, Java-based configuration was added. You might know it through the configuration annotation. Spring expression language was added, and also for the first time, Spring started supporting embedded databases. We should remember that up to this point, as Spring was growing and more tools and features were being added to Spring, it was becoming increasingly harder and more complicated to start a new application. By introduction of Spring Boot, that problem was addressed. Instead of forcing the developers to make all the decisions and make all the configurations manually, Spring Boot took an opinionated view of the application and made a lot of choices beforehand on behalf of the developer. To highlight this change, Rob Winch from the Spring Boot team sent this tweet in 2013 to show that you can write a Spring Boot application in just one tweet. This was a huge deal at the time. The next major release happened in 2018 when the second version of Spring Boot and the version 5 of Spring was released. In this release, 8 was chosen as the baseline version for Java. Also, for the first time, support for reactive programming and NoSQL databases were added. Of course, there were other small upgrades and improvements in the framework. The last major milestone that I'm going to touch in this video came in 2022 when the third version of Spring Boot and the sixth version of Spring was released. In this version, 17 was added as the baseline Java version. Also, the support for reactive programming that was added previously got some improvements. Also, the support for GraalVM native images was also added. Jakarta Enterprise Edition 9 compatibility and some improvements in metrics gathering and tracing was improved by introducing Micrometer into the framework. Okay, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this brief history of these amazing tools that have helped thousands of people to solve their problems. Let me know if you think I have missed any major milestones or if you want to share anything about your own experience with these tools down below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.